let's see if that audio is up there. Sorry for that, might have been a little loud, that sudden turning on of the microphone. Checkity check, check, check. Let's do this. That works, I think. You'll have to let me know how the audio's going. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to be making another painting by another one of my very, very favorite artists. Today we are going to be looking at arguably the greatest artist in Spanish history from Spain, Francisco Goya. And let's kind of dive right. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, I want to show you the image that we're going to be painting. No, not that. Let's try it again. No, let's try it again. There we go. Okay. Today I was like, oh, I'm set up so much earlier than normal. Why am I so ready? And then, then the show starts like, oh yeah, no, of course I'm not ready. So, there we are. So this is the painting that we're going to be making by Goya, Saturn Devouring His Sun. And this is, I would say probably his most famous painting. There's a few others we're going to look at shortly here in a second, but this would probably be what most people would immediately think of when they think of Goya. Before I even kind of get into his biography, etc., I want you to know that there's an outline for today's painting, which you can print out, or you could just color it in, depending on how old you are. Anybody can color in, you don't have to be a little kid. But I'm going to use this outline to transfer the drawing onto a canvas. Now, I've actually already done that in advance of today's episode, and I'll show you. But it's a fairly simple one to do. And if you're wondering, how do I find this magical outline? Well, you can go into... There's a Dropbox link in the video description below. You'll see a whole bunch of other artists that we've already looked at and made paintings based on. If you want to learn how to paint an animal, like Robert Bateman's eagle, here's one. Amrita Shergill, awesome portrait. There's Batman. Let me see, other cool ones. Superman we've done. We're doing a Spider-Man one in a few weeks. If you're wondering why we're doing all DC comics, we're going to do the Marvel. We're getting into the Marvel. And here we are. We go right down here to Goya. And you'll see there's 3 files in here. We've got the original painting, and then we've got 2 versions of the outline. One's a JPEG and one's a PDF. So that's why there's 3 files in that folder. So I would encourage you to download that, because it'll certainly make life easier to transfer that image onto the canvas, so that you're not spending your whole time drawing, you're painting along with me, right? Thought I'd also let you know that there's a private Facebook group just for people who are painting along with me, and people are posting suggestions for potential future paintings here. A rainbow being sucked up by a cloud here that looks like a George O'Keeffe photograph by Alfred Stieglitz, her husband, I imagine. And then, of course, obviously I post about every painting we're going to do. I see a few people were saying today's episode is a little bit too dark and they didn't want to paint along with me. I understand that. There's Josh painting along. Josh makes a painting every day, I think, which is great. That's awesome. I'm super proud of you, Josh, for being so productive. And then other people here, these are the paintings by Lin Fingmian that we did a few weeks ago. There was 3 paintings in the Dropbox. We only did 1 on camera, but there were multiple other ones you could have done. Anyway, so I just think it's... I love looking at all the work that you guys have created. I thought I would just start here. You know, if we just look up Goya and his artwork, if we type it into the search engine in Google in images, we see a selection of his paintings. And what's kind of interesting is the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So out of the first, whatever, 12, 15 images on here, but 10 of them are from this series of paintings called the Black Paintings. And so we'll talk about that here in a second. But I just think it's really interesting because it does show how important this series of artworks is in the overall context of Goya's life. Let's just take a quick little look here. Goya is, this is the Wiki Art page, and Wiki Art often is a great resource to look for images for artists, especially artists that are in the public domain that have been dead for over, it always changes, I think it's 60 years now, and then you can reproduce their artwork ad infinitum. Although there are restrictions, I know you don't have to get into the details, I know, but okay. So here's, a list again of his most famous works. Some of these actually haven't seen before. We have here Saturn devouring one of his sons. This series here, these, let's just take a quick look. This would probably be his second most famous artwork, which is depiction of Spanish soldiers and civilians being executed by Napoleon's troops, because one of the things, and we'll talk about this throughout today's episode, Goya, his art and his often mirrored what was going on in the world around him, and what was going on in the world around him is he was a Spanish artist living in Spain. Let's see, when was his birth date? It was 1746 to 1828, and the Napoleon invaded Spain and pretty much all of Europe around the early 1800s, and Napoleon was pretty brutal. He was his reputation has been recuperated significantly over the years, but Napoleon was no friend to the people whose armies he destroyed as he sort of tromped around Europe, and the Spanish people took quite the brunt of the punishment from Napoleon, so much so that let's see, there's another very famous series here, The Disasters of War, which is maybe even worth just looking up. The Disasters of War again show the images of Napoleon, and you can see like these images of just all the sorts of horrific stuff, people being executed and chopped up and hanged, and it's not just Napoleon, but also the government, because there was all this revolutionary stuff going around in Europe. Remember, the French Revolution happened only about 20 years before this, right? And Goya would have been alive during that time, and when the French Revolution happened and they chopped the heads of Marie Antoinette off and her family, all of the other kings and queens around Europe got pretty panicky, right? They're like, oh, that's what's happening next door. We better be pretty careful here. And so there was like this huge repression of any other revolutionary movements. So not only did Napoleon come in and devastate Spain and other places around Europe, but the kings and queens who ran each of those countries also were quite repressive to the local population. So again, this Disasters of War series, I want to see, there's another, and we're also looking at a whole bunch of etchings, by the way. So Goya was also a very famous printmaker. So here's another, some of these are almost, not safe for work. So this is another very famous etching of his, like these bodies. It's been, there's some pretty violent imagery. So what I want to say here, we've talked about this Disasters of War. Okay. Let's bring that back here. I closed the wrong tab. Or we can just, what's interesting about Goya, let's just stay here for a second. Goya he is, you might say, the fulcrum of which the classical period of painting, from the Renaissance up until like the early 1800s, you have painters like Leonardo and Raphael, and sculptors and painters like Michelangelo, and in Spain you have Velázquez. You have this great classical period of painting, and Enlightenment, right? The Enlightenment that came across Europe, which is also one of the reasons why you had the Revolution. And so Goya he was, in his earlier period, an old master, I think it says in here somewhere, and kind of he was taught that classical style of painting. We'll get into that. And then he is one of the persons that really ushers in the modern era of painting. And you may have heard of modernist art. In fact, the Museum of Modern Art is really a museum originally about modernist art. And it's a big loaded term. But modernism is this, the beginning, is sort of the breaking free from the classical period of art. And really, that the first artists like Goya to break free from classicism are the Romantic artists. And when you hear romantic, you think like, oh, that means they're like really into paintings of love and tenderness and kissing, and like it really almost, it does in a way. Obviously the origins of, like, to be romantic have similar roots, but when it comes to art, Romanticism is all about artists who embrace the emotional side of themselves rather than the intellectual side of themselves, which is more identified with Classicism, right? And Romanticism is also about we're starting to really lean into the individual and the interior of the individual, and what does the individual artist have to say? What are they feeling? What are they thinking now? As opposed to prior to that, the classical period is really, artists are illustrating, the famous historical scenes, or painting kings and queens, and really has virtually nothing to do with the interior thoughts and feelings of the artists themselves, right? The king of Spain or Italy or Russia or England, France, they don't care what Velázquez has to say or Leonardo has to say. They don't really care about his emotions, right? They want a portrait of themselves, right? And that's your job. You paint a portrait of me, the king, or paint a portrait of Jesus on the cross, or on the ceiling, the famous prophets, but like, keep your thoughts to yourself, right? Obviously, there were artists like Caravaggio in particular, who was a late Renaissance painter, who, every artist kind of snuck their own stuff in, but you'd have to be very careful of doing that. Otherwise, you could get your head cut off, right? But Romanticism is where artists really started to say, like, hey, I got something to say, and I'm going to express my feelings and my thoughts with conviction. So let me see. And this painting here, this Caspar David Friedrich painting, we're going to make that painting, I think in December, we're going to be doing this, because this is probably the most famous painting of the Romantic period. And I know we're going to get to the painting stuff here shortly. And actually, yeah, let's start painting, and then I'll kind of, because there's so much. I love Goya, and I love this period of time in art. It's such an important period of time. I'm so excited to be finally painting it today. So that's why I'm kind of digressing a little bit. So let's look at. Actually, I'm going to show you how I transfer this image here. So let's make this big, and I'll just talk over this while this is on screen. So what we're looking at is a blank canvas. Now, as I always do, I buy one of these blank canvases. You can get them at the dollar store, or you can get them at I've got some special ones that are like an extra $1 that I bought off of Amazon. You can see they're 9x12 size. And I take them and I add an extra layer of gesso on it, white gesso, and then I sand it down after it's dried overnight, and that makes it nice and smooth. And there's the printout, and usually I try to put it roughly in the center of the canvas, and then I'm going to tape it down. This one doesn't really have a horizon line in there, so I'm not really concerned about making it straight. It can be pretty skewed or crooked. And then I take a piece of carbon paper, just like this, and you can see it's been used many times. So that's the great thing, is you can reuse that same piece of carbon paper over and over and over and over again. And you can buy one of them from Amazon. There's a link in the description below if you want to get the same kind that I'm using. Or you can get them at most art supply stores, should have them, and if not, also fabric stores are a good place to find them. Okay, so I'm just going to zip through this pretty quickly because it's pretty self-explanatory. And there you go. Right? Once we've traced over there, you can take it. I always kind of just do a little double check to make sure that I've got all of the pencil lines in the right places. That's why I also use a blue pencil, so that I can I'm pretty sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, so here's the resulting, this is the one you just saw me do on camera, and it also leaves a reversed image on the back side of this, in case for whatever reason you want to use this. And then you could also put a sheet on this side and then do the reverse for whatever reason, if you want to do a mirrored image of this. Okay, wow, lots of comments in the chat. I'll try to get to that here. Let's put some paint on the canvas. So, now, this painting is a dark painting, and even though it's a dark painting, we're going to cover a lot of it with black paint. I'm still going to put on a nice coat of warm yellow, just because we are going to use black, but we're going to mix some colors into the black, so it's not just a solid black, but there's this kind of life going on inside the black, which is going to give it that mysterious glow that is going to infuse the painting with a little bit of mystery. So you can see I just took some of that warm yellow and I put some water in it, probably about 1-to-1 water. And actually just the other day I bought some airbrush medium, which I might start mixing into the paint instead of water in the future, but we will see. The reason why is I was just sort of laying in bed thinking, you know, technically adding water to your paint is what it's doing is it's breaking down the bonds that hold the pigment onto, you know, together, right? Because basically the paint that you use, all paint is essentially a powdered pigment that is held together with some sort of a binder. And a binder can be oil-based, like oil paint, or tempera paint, like that children use in schools, which has very little binding power, which is why it's very easy to clean off children's clothes and hands. There's acrylic paint, gouache, watercolor, egg tempera, you know, which is entirely organic. There's, I'm sure, a few more that I can't think of off the top of my head, but you know, when we put too much water in acrylic paint, like I just washed my brush here, right? It breaks down the paint entirely until it falls apart. So, do you want to be doing too much of that? Not really, because it's going to make your paint kind of unstable. So, in the long run, rather than putting water on here, you probably want to be mixing some kind of medium in there to thin it out. An airbrush medium is, in fact, I'll just show you. Do I have it around here somewhere? I just bought this. Airbrush medium, I don't know if you can hear that, is basically like a fluid, right? It's like, because it's intended to, you mix paint with airbrush medium and you can put it into an airbrush machine and spray it, right? Because it turns super fluid. So that would probably be a better thing for me to do going forward. But this is an intro painting class, but I do think some of the people watching me right now have been painting along with me for since September, and there's some of you who've been drawing and painting with me since the drawing class began over a year ago. So if you've been painting with me twice a week for what, 8-9 months already, you're getting really good. And it's kind of just worth thinking about like how we can up our game even more, right? Like at this point, I would say you're no longer an amateur painter. So anyway, let me get my little stickers onto my palette here so that you can see what colors I'm using, but also so I can remember where all the colors go, because sometimes, you know, I'm kind of chewing gum and walking at the same time here. So, okay, so let's put some paint on our palette. Now I'm going to be pretty, I'm not going to put too much paint on here, because I'm not even sure what colors and how many of each one I actually want to use. If you'll recall the painting we made just the other day, the Gerard Zakoto painting, I ended up only using warm colors in there. So half of the paint I put on here I just ended up throwing in the garbage. So and seeing paint go unused causes me a little bit of anxiety, because I just think like, oh, that's a painting that just went unmade right there. So anytime I can avoid throwing paint out makes me sleep a little bit better at night. Okay, and if you're the majority of people who are watching right now, or a year or 10 years from now, are people that have never seen me before and have never painted with me before, and probably have lots of questions as to why we're using the colors that we're using, what the colors are. There's information in the video description below, links to an entire 45 episode intro painting course. It's all free and available to you to watch whatever time of day or night you want. And we talk in the first few episodes of that class about warm and cool colors. I think a whole episode on which paints I suggest that you buy so you can have the same things as I'm using here. Okay. So this is almost dry. I'm going to use a blow dryer just to finish it up. It's very important to have some tea or water around so that you can take a break every once in a while you're painting. I don't know about you, but I'll be here painting for probably the next 3 hours without stopping, so it's good to be loaded up and ready to go. Oh, this one's fun. Okay, so let's back that up just a bit. Okay, so let's take a look at this painting, or actually let's take a look at the original and just think a little bit about how we're going to make this painting. That's weird. Look at this. Oh, look, there's. Come on. Some of the. Oh, it's not even. Okay, that's weird. It's interesting. On my screen, it's like a semi-transparent in behind, and on the preview screen it looks normal. Anyway, so I think you can already see that there's this warm yellow coming through on the body, but there's also in this dark black area, if we can zoom in a little bit, you'll see that it's not just a solid empty black, that there's something, there's other colors that are there. And so that's just, I think I just wanted to kind of remind people of that, as we scroll around the painting. Right, it's like, look how terrifying that image is, right? So how should we begin this one? I'm thinking what I think I might do is actually mix a dark color and do a little bit of outlining here. In fact, yeah. So, and this might be kind of close to how he would have done this painting. So, let's get a brush ready to do a little bit of mixing, and let's mix one of the darker colors that we can get with this palette. Now what's great about the colors that we have here is we can get virtually, let's say maybe 95% of every single color that exists in the visible spectrum to humans, right? So including very, very dark colors and including very, very bright colors or light colors like with white, right? So let's mix kind of a warm, dark color. So I'm going to take a little bit of my warm yellow. I'm going to take a bit of my warm blue. And if I just mix these up to start, I've got a green, right? No surprise there. Blue and or yellow and blue together are going to make a green. This green is sort of kind of like you would maybe call it like a racing green. It's got a lot more blue in it. And then let's take a little bit of warm red. And if we mix this together, we've got a brown. Alright, so if we mix red with green, you're going to get a brown. And actually, you know what? I think I'm going to just use this. I was going to mix one even darker. If we wanted to go darker, just adding a little bit of the cool red and cool blue or cool yellow, any combination of that fourth color is going to make it even darker, right? Because now you've got all sorts of colors crisscrossing through the neutral core. So just as a quick review, the neutral core is, you know, if we think of the color wheel. Right, this is the thing we did in the very first episode of that 45 episode course, right? If we think of the color wheel, right, we have, this is our warm yellow we just used, here's our warm blue that we just used, and here's our warm red that we just used to make the brown, right? So we mixed these two colors to get this green, and then we mixed it with the red, and so that's pulling these colors, the resulting color, towards the neutral core, right? Now it's a little bit kind of on the browny side of things, so that color is probably around here somewhere, the resulting color we just mixed. But once we start adding other colors in here, then we're pulling this color firmly into that neutral core area. So then it becomes like a really, really dark, blackish kind of color. And if you add white to it, you'll see that it's basically goes gray, right? Okay, so I like this brown though, because I'm going to use this to do just a little bit of outlining. If you found the color of brown that you just mixed is too blue, right? It almost looks, or you could say maybe it looks too purpley, that means you've got a lot of red and blue together, and if you just add a little bit more yellow to it, it'll take the purple right away. If it looks too orangey, that means you've got too much red and yellow, and just adding a little more blue to it is going to make it darker and darker. Okay, so let's take a smaller brush, and then I'm going to go around. Wow, there's so many things in the chat there. So let's zoom in. And I'm going to just kind of go around and just very quickly do some outlining here. One of the things, and this would have been probably close to how he would have painted it. Now, I don't think he probably not have even drawn with a pencil to get started. He might have just immediately gone right in and started using a kind of probably a darker color like we're doing right here. And because often that's what artists do, is they start by kind of searching for the image with a dark color on the canvas, and they're just sort of painting. And if you're using oil paint like Goya would have done, you can even kind of scrub that paint away just with a cloth, and you can wipe off the paint that you're not happy with, right? Obviously with acrylic paint, this paint dries much faster, so there's only so much scrubbing you can do. You have to be, you'll see sometimes when I'm painting, I sometimes just take my finger and I just wipe paint away when it's right after it's on there, and it sometimes goes almost entirely right away. You can see I'm not being careful at all. Right? I'm doing this so that if I end up putting other layers of paint over top of this, that I can still find my pencil lines. And also, it's going to just give even if we don't want these kind of hard edges, which kind of look a little bit comic booky, we'll still have, like, later on, we'll have some kind of like these defining edges which can be kind of buried a little bit, which is kind of nice. So that even if you don't want them there, they're still going to kind of work below the surface to help define the shapes from one another. Now, one of the strange things with this image, like, oops, you can't even see what I'm doing. So, one of the strange things with this painting is it was actually kind of, if I zoom even further out, the original is a quite narrow painting, kind of like, so part of this side here, I've actually drawn in. I've just sort of made a guesstimate as to, as to the part of the body that may have been there, even though that some of this body exists in the shadows. And now I'm not even sure exactly why, but this painting, along with the other 13 images that form that series of the black paintings, were images that Goya painted on the walls of his house, right? He never intended anyone to see this painting, or at least we don't think so, right? He made a bunch of these very, very dark paintings. Remember, and I said, like, these are the paintings that are really among the most famous paintings that he ever did, and among the most important paintings he ever did, and they were really for himself, because these paintings, articulate his anxieties about what's going on in the world around him and in Spain, and some of the troubling things that happened during the French occupation of Spain. And I think, let's see, camera's crooked. So he may have made these paintings on the walls and never showed them to anybody, and no one knew they were even there until after he died. And probably he did that because he was potentially afraid of what might happen to him if they were made public, right? So I think they were almost like a private diary, you could say, like, that he is just sort of releasing this these feelings and thoughts from inside of himself. Like this particular image, which is just like, it reminds me also a lot of Edvard Munch's The Scream. Like, right? It's just this person, like, it's intended, like, or at least we think of it as, Saturn. Saturn is a Roman god, right? I think, or was he a Greek god? I'm sure somebody will let me know. But Saturn devouring his son, like just tearing his head off and eating it. So, you know, on the surface, it is just this image from mythology, but you could also see it as him sort of articulating, like this incredible level of frustration and anger, and you could also see it as like maybe the country of Spain devouring itself, right? That it's collapsing into anarchy, into chaos and disorder, and you have people switching sides back and forth because they don't know who's in charge day to day. Like, one day it's the king. Oh, no, not the king. It's the revolutionaries. And nope, now it's Napoleon. Oh, now it's the revolutionaries against Napoleon. Now, oh, now it's the, you know, going back and forth, and people are just dying left, right, and center. And so, I mean, I would just imagine he's just like, this is insane. We're living in insane times, right? Like, you think people watching right now are like, oh, you think we're living in insane, you think Goya was living in insane times? You should try 2020, 2021. Like, for the past 5 years, it's been crazy, right? But it kind of goes to show you that there have been times of great confusion in the past as well, right? It's not like the past few years have been totally isolated things that people in the past would have no understanding of, right? In fact, you could argue that the times that we're living in now are probably some of the most stable times comparatively to history, right? Anyway, long story short, let's continue. The other thing so one of the reasons as well that this painting might have had this very narrow composition was, again, he painted it on the wall, and then after he died and people went into his studio, and they're like, whoa, look at all these amazing paintings. How do we get them out of the studio? Well, let's take them off the walls and put them onto canvas. Maybe sounds great in theory, but many people argue that the removal of those paintings from the walls and transferring them onto canvas destroyed them completely, and that what we see now is I've seen people refer to it as like a cartoon version of the originals, right? That they were just, that not only were they damaged while they were taken off the walls, but people subsequently did retouching and repainting on them, and that very little of Goya's actual hand, his original paint strokes, remain in the paintings. Now, I have no idea. I haven't done the research to find out, and I don't even know if there's any way of knowing exactly what is his paint strokes and what was other people's paint strokes. Okay. So now we've got some pencil lines on here. Again, what I would have imagined is that he probably would have made this painting kind of just eyeballed it. He probably was standing in front of his wall. He might have had a sketch or two on some loose paper, because sketchbooks weren't really a thing at the time. There were often sketchbooks would just be loose pieces of paper which might be bound after you drew on those pages, and then you or somebody else after you're dead might bind them together into a book. But so he may have had some sketches and was probably, you know, just sort of looking at his sketches and then just sort of painting on the wall with kind of probably a dark line like that. It would probably have just been like throwing a bunch of quick lines on there. If you remember, we did a Berthe Morisot painting of flowers back in probably would have been October of last year. It's probably episode 15 of the intro to painting class, and in that episode we did something very similar to what Goya would have done, is just sort of just loosely sketching in the composition rather than drawing it. So I'm pretty confident that he would probably have started similar to this. And obviously, if he didn't think anyone would see it, he was probably gave him a lot of freedom just to kind of like, oh, I don't really care if the arms and legs are too long or too short or whatever. No one's going to see this, you know, and if they do, I'll be long dead by that point, so who cares, right? Okay, so let's take a look again here and think. What should we start with? In my mind, what I'm debating right now is, should we go to the warm, these orangey, yellowy colors, or should we go to the blue first? And what I'm looking at is to try to see if I can find any places where there's really one color over top of the other. Now, he probably would have gone back and forth. He's painting in oil paints, and he would have had a palette, and so he could easily just paint back and go back and forth, so we might do that. But I think let's I'm going to zoom in here and see if I can see some clues. I think he's painting blue first. Yeah, because you could see him scrubbing over top with some red. So let's mix up a blue. So we're going to take a cool blue. And even maybe put a bit of white into it, and we're going to kind of. Oops. So let's go to this view here. So I'm taking my cool blue. Take a bit of white, and right now this is great, but it's also a little bit, it's a little bit bright, right? And this painting is a darker painting, so maybe if we put this color on there, it's going to be a bit intense. So we've got this brown that we made earlier, or just moments ago. I'm going to take that and just get a bit of it on my brush. You see, I'm just going to mix that into the paint a little bit, and that all of a sudden, we still have this brighter baby blue color, but now we've modified it so that it's a little bit dirtier, right? It's back towards the neutral core a bit, right? And not only that, I'm going to take a bit of this glazing fluid. You could do this with water. If you absolutely had to, if you didn't have any glazing fluid, you could do it with water. But the one thing with if you add a lot of water, it's going to dry really fast. The glazing fluid will slow the drying process down a little bit. And because we just want something that's maybe a little bit more transparent. Okay, so let's put that brush to the side. Let me just get us looking for. I'm going to go down to a smaller brush, right? So you can see how small this is. And then let's kind of just take this paint. And again, we can be really loose with it, in the same way that Goya might have been. Now you can kind of see why I painted, let's zoom in, why I painted these outlines on there, just so that I can be a little bit more confident that whatever I do will shine through here. Now you could probably get away with painting this everywhere, But I think what he's doing is really using this to paint in the shadows mostly. Now there's, you know, even on this kind of pasty dead figure here, has a little bit of this blue in there, but it's also like where the light is coming from in this painting. It's a little bit hard to say, you know, like everything with this painting, it's a bit of a mystery, but I imagine the paint is coming from like, or from the top left, right? Like I imagine our light source is somewhere like hitting the figure straight on. So we have the highlights here and on the arm and then on the knee, right? Otherwise, but it is, you know, it's intended to be a bit of a mysterious, odd painting. So anyway, let's go back in. Where else should we put this? I just saw in the chat out of the corner of my eye Dolores saying, Donna saying, this pic is too weird for me. It would give me night horses. And I was like, night horses? And then I like nightmares. Horses, mares, right? Very, very clever. You don't hear too many horse jokes. So I applaud and I don't know, maybe I've never heard that one before, and I am a student of dad jokes, so that one is going to go right to the top of my dad joke playlist here. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Don. And again, I know there's lots of things in chat. I'll get to that here shortly. I've just been doing so much talking that I want to get into the painting here. And again, you just see how sloppy I am with this painting, right? Some of this is going to get covered with paint, but it's also just like really fun to paint this way and to be a little bit rough with the application of paint. Now there are a few things there. I wondered, like, and you could tell me what you think. Like, what do you think's going on down here? Is this just his thigh? Is this a thigh and then his calf and just like, or is it just me, or does that not look like the silhouette of a figure standing there? I couldn't figure out what was going on there. So you can, it's up to you. Like, is that another son of Saturn about to be devoured? It's been a while since, it's been 20 years since I took Greek mythology in college, so I don't know how many sons Saturn had. You know, those Greek and Roman characters, or not characters, gods were often had like hundreds and hundreds of offspring, so I don't know how many of them he ate, but anyway. Okay, so if I just zoom out, what you should see here is really that I've tried to just go where the shadows would be if there was light hitting the body. Even here in this knee, I put a little bit of blue here because I'm going to put some white over there eventually. Okay. I think that's pretty good for a first step here. Now what I think I'm going to do is do the next pass will be on the background. So I'm going to paint a darker color that will go, actually, well, you know what, I think actually I'm going to paint the same color in the background. I'm just going to need a bigger brush. And you know, I'm going to be pretty, you know, loose is the way I paint this. Kind of scrub it in. Right, so my goal here is not to completely cover the yellow, that first wash that we put there, but just really to get some extra color in there, because you know this is going to get very dark, but I want there to be things in the dark, because in that same you know, where we're looking and we're like, what is that? What is this here? And then I also, when I was drawing it, thinking, what is going on right here? Like, I thought kind of also might look like another corpse on there, right? The more I started drawing and looking at it, it kind of looked like there might be an arm here and a head, like if we zoom in. Like, you tell me what you think is going on here. Like, is this a head? Is that an arm? And maybe another arm sort of laying on its back, and then maybe its torso is down here, or, you know, is this a belly button, right, or a bite mark, or what? You know, so there's lots of weird things happening in the darkness, and if we give this area that it's going to be dark some even just cursory attention like that, it will help imbue that darkness with mystery, right? And just like when I'm looking at the painting, I'm kind of like going, wait, what is going on? That's what we want other people to be doing, right? We want to suck people in so that when they're looking, they'll go like, oh, look, it's just a bunch of shadows, but instead they're, right? Like, I've been to this museum in Madrid. I think this is at the Prado, and this is really the most popular room in the Prado, I think, because there's two major museums in Madrid, and I think it's the Prado that has this. The other major painting at the Prado is Picasso's Guernica, right? Those two rooms have the most amount of people in it, and these paintings are dark paintings, and the room is lit with very little, it's mostly natural light, and so you have to kind of get up close and kind of look at them, and slowly you start to see things coming out of the darkness, which is like, you know, it was painted almost 200 years, you know, almost to the, you know, it's, yeah, 198 years ago, right, this painting was painted, and that's long before iPhones and Netflix and computers and all sorts of other things. So painting had to fill that gap of that film and television and video games, all those things are for us today, right? So a painting you might have on your wall for your whole life as you look at it, right? And so you want to be able to look at it and see more things over the years, right? As opposed to be like, oh yeah, I see it, it's great, right? You want to be able to like, oh, you know, I've been looking at this painting for 20 years and I just realized there might be another person there. Whoa, mind blown, right? Okay, so we got our mysterious blue in there. What should we do next? I think what I want to do next is actually put some white into this picture, which is very different than the way we normally work. But I see like these dashes of white underneath some of the yellow that we're going to put on here, and that's an effect you can really only get if you're putting white down and then putting other colors over the white. So all of that is very strange, right? But yeah. So let's we want a white, but not a bright white. We want sort of a bit of a slightly dirty white. So let's take the same, and I'm not even going to bother cleaning my brush. I'm just going to wipe off the water. I'm going to take some white, and I'm going to go right into this brown and just steal some of that darker color, so that the white that I'm putting down here is not just a bright, super shiny white, but a white that's got, I always just say to dirty, like a slightly dirty color. But it's still going to be brighter than anything else on the canvas. Right, in fact, I'm just going to put a little bit more there. I'm going to put a tad of glazing fluid in here, if I can remember to open the... Just so it's not, again, not too opaque. So let's try this. We're using Goya's technique here as we work on this part of the painting. So let's put a bit. It's almost like the highlights we're putting on here. Now just be a little careful when you're doing this, because you'll see when we start putting yellow and oranges back over top of this, it's gonna react to this white in a way that is usually not desirable. Like usually it can be can frustrate you a little bit, but including it might frustrate me a little bit. We'll see. So I'm just looking for where the brightest highlights are. Oops. There's something. Can't tell me that this isn't something. Like, is that really just this? Like, cause what is this shape? Like, if this was just a dark black line that went over there, like, yeah, of course, that's his thigh going right over, and this would be his calf muscle. But you know, that looks to me like, why would his calf muscle come up over his thigh like that? It's so that's, you know, again, I don't know if it could just be he just made a mistake with his anatomy, but you know, Goya was one of the greatest artists of all time, right? Like, and not that great artists don't make mistakes. I've got a list. I've been thinking about one day writing a book of like all of the, you know, the greatest mistakes in art history, and because I think it's also can be helpful for artists to know that even the masters, you know, fell on their face a few times, right? Sometimes you think like, oh, they're just he's a perfect person. How could he possibly have messed up, right? But if you want to use like a sports analogy, not even like Wayne Gretzky or Tom Brady won every single game, right? Everyone had an off night sometimes. So, let's zoom back out and just take a quick little second. Okay. I mean, even just the painting like that, I think is really cool and weird. Like, this seems very contemporary, does it not? Like, I could see this being on the wall of a major art gallery right now, and it would seem perfectly normal to be there. And so it's interesting to think of like, oh, Goya would have seen something similar to this on his wall 200 years ago. And, you know, there is something to that idea of actually, I'm just going to paint these eyes, the white of these eyes, with just pure white in there. And an argument could be made that modernism is really the embrace of the unfinished aspects of classical painting, and taking classical painting techniques, and rather than taking them all the way, like from, let's say if you think of like painting the Mona Lisa, and let's say there's is there 26 letters or 24 letters in the alphabet? However many letters there are in the alphabet, if you think of like all 24 or 26, and those would be, let's say, steps, you know, A to B, and by the time you get to Z, you've got a finished Mona Lisa, right? Modernist painters sort of got to T and said, you know what, I like where we are right now, I'm going to leave it, and I'm going to walk away, right? Which is why painters, you know, during this period of time, that Romantic era, the classical painters would have looked at paintings, late Goya paintings by Caspar David Friedrich, and been like, oh, like, what are you guys are so lazy? Like, why don't you do the last 10 steps and it'll be a beautiful painting? Right now, it just looks unfinished, right? That was like not an uncommon criticism to hear, and we heard those same criticisms going all the way up to, like, you know, in Canada with the Group of Seven, right? Like, oh, they look like great underpaintings. They look like the great beginnings of a paintings, or great sketches. Let's just now put another, you know, 20 hours in, and it'll be finished, and it'll look great, right? Or the same sort of criticism you would have heard of Claude Monet and the Impressionists, or Van Gogh, right? Great start to your painting, but when are you going to finish it? Oh, what do you mean it's done? It looks like pretty sloppy. Like, a good finished painting is one that is like, shows no evidence of brushstrokes, according to that particular approach to painting. Okay. I'm doing a lot of talking today, but I'm also just very excited because this is like one of the undeniable great painters. Okay, so I'm gonna go with, like, I'm gonna mix an orange, and we're gonna start painting some of this stuff on the face here, and then we're gonna slowly start adding more glazing fluid to that orange, where we're gonna get thinner paint that we're gonna apply, and we're even gonna put that thinner paint over top in the background as well. So let's mix up an orange. Let's get a bit of a bigger brush here. I think I've got 4 brushes I've used today. I'm just going to keep probably going back to those same 4 brushes. So I'm going to take my warm yellow here, probably just take most of it here. And I'm going to take my warm red, mix that up. And you know, that's not bad. Like, that's pretty close. But again, it is maybe a little bit too saturated of a color, a little bit too bright. So what I need is I want it to desaturate it a little bit. Now, there's various ways to desaturate a color and to lower its intensity. The most common way that most people think of is to either add white or black to a color, because that will take away the saturation, the brightness of the color. Often people think, what? You mean adding white to a color takes its saturation away? Absolutely. Right? You add white to a color, yes, it appears to be lighter, but it also takes away the saturation of a color until, obviously, if you put a ton of white into it, then it just becomes pure white, right? It might have a fraction of the color. So it's, you know, it's like if we put white into red, it gets pink and progressively until it's white again, right? So rather than adding black or white to a color, another way is to add another color to lower the saturation without losing the intensity of that color, or without losing color, really. And so what I'm going to do is, you could add a little bit of blue to this, but I'm just going to go back to the well here and take a bit of this brown that we had. I'm just going to add a little bit to that color, because we can always add more paint later on, but just a little bit of brown is just going to, you know, I mean, it's very, and there's also some blue on my brush here. You notice I'm not really worried about cleaning my brush today. So I'm going to take this color. Wondering if I'm going to just go to a slightly smaller brush, and I'm just going to even just take the paint right off the brush here. And I'm just going to start in the hair for a second here, until I get, like, you know, it's like, you know, when you get a pair of pants and it says, like, don't use this, you know, test your cleaning detergent on this. Sometimes like nicer shirts might have a little piece of fabric that's attached to the side. You're like, what is this little thing, right? It's so you can test your laundry detergent on to see if it'll ruin your clothes. Same sort of thing, like if you're going to mix a color and you're going to place it somewhere, think about where you can put it on the painting that won't destroy the painting, right? So maybe not right on the nose. You can test it somewhere else until you can feel like, oh, okay, I think that's going to work really well there. Okay. So I start feeling, okay, it's not bad. So what we're looking for is this kind of little bit of a slightly muddy color, right? Which is how we're going to build up these layers of darkness. And I'm kind of just, I'm taking my time. I could probably do this painting in 20 minutes if I was really wanting to hurry through it. But what I don't know. I love this kind of thing. It's sort of like, you know, I just take my time going around on here. Even painting over some of the darker blues. Not every blue I'm going to paint over. So what we're slowly getting is this weird mix of color, right? Like, and that's what we want is for people to look at it and go like, how on earth did you mix that color? Like, what is, and you'll say, well, it's not one color, there's like 4 or 5 colors in there. Let's keep on going under here. You'll notice I haven't done the face yet. I'm going to come back and do that. Now that I've kind of tested it out and I feel like, oh, okay, I think I've got the mixture, the formula that I want. Okay. So I'm just I need to mix just a little bit more of that. Oh, let's get some more warm yellow on the palette. So here's this color. Let's take again some of that brown. If I need more of it, just steal a little bit from here. It's that same brown we used for those first few lines that we put on the face at the beginning. Okay, right now I'm just using this brush as like my palette, right? I can just walk around with it. Again, I'm using this smaller brush and I'm kind of just scrubbing this in, and I like that it's not like, again, it's not like I could just do a yellow with a roller and just go over the whole painting with a roller really quickly. I'm not going to do that. I want there to be all of these weird little brush strokes in there. That's what's going to make this painting have all of that extra life to it that people are going to wonder what's going on in that painting. Okay. So now I'm applying the paint a little bit thicker on the face here. And I'm probably going to go back and add, well, I will add more orange and stuff onto that face later on, but I think for now that's all I need to do. Okay, I feel pretty good about that, so let's zoom back out. And let's go even further. Like, what's interesting to me about this painting right now is really all the colors we're using are actually relatively muted. I mean, even the yellow that we put down, we diluted it with water, and we painted it over the white canvas, so it's not very intense. It's been tinted, so it's lowered its intensity, and yet the combination of that, and remember our blue, we put some white in it, and then we dirtied it up with some brown, so it's not as bright as we would imagine, but, you know, looking at it right now, it almost looks like it's like a fluorescent yellow and a fluorescent blue, those two colors which are almost opposite each other on the color wheel, creating this like really bright image. And yet we could make it 5 times brighter if we actually used the colors right out of the tube. Right? So it's that strange thing that happens when we use these opposing colors together. They create this intense opposition contrast of colors. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm also going to take this same color that we just applied over the body, and I'm going to put it in the background as well. So I'm just going to take it, and it might get a little bit more red in some places than others. Right? I'm just going to kind of, you know, in fact, I'll just do that. I'm going to have some places that have more red and some places that have less red, just so you can see how fairly loose I'm going to be with this. I'm going to go in here, let's get a little maybe more yellow this time. It's all going to look fairly red, but okay, great. So I love the way that looks right now. That looks so wild. Okay. So the next step I'm going to do is now I'm going to mix a really dark color, and we're going to start adding the darkness to the figure and into the background. In fact, we may even start a little bit with the background. So, bearing that in mind, I'm just going to quickly blow dry all of that. Like, can you imagine what people would have thought if they walked into Goya's studio? He kept the studio locked. He wouldn't let people in his studio. At this time, well, actually relatively early in his life, at the age, how old would he? I think but at the age 30, I'd say 35, he had some mysterious illness. We still don't know positively in terms of history yet, but he had some type of illness that caused him to lose his hearing. So he was deaf from the I think what, mid 1770s, early 1780s, until he died, obviously. So for the majority of his life, really, he could not. I mean, he probably could hear a little tiny bit, but you know that would have also increased the anxiety and fear he would have had, right? He was like a court painter. At one point earlier in his life, he was the official artist to the King of Spain, right? And then obviously there was all this upheaval, and I think, as has happened in many times, sometimes the artist who's painting the king's portrait, when the king gets his head cut off, they look around and see, oh, who else is in the room whose head we're going to cut, right? So if you're in that position where you were once in that inner circle and now there's somebody else in charge who goes around cutting people's heads off, you're like, you want to kind of fade into the background until things sort themselves out, right? And that would have, so you can just imagine this guy, he was a bit of a cranky, ornery fellow anyway, but, you know, and he can't hear. He's living in the countryside in this former barn that, you know, in an odd coincidence, was actually owned right before him by another person who was also deaf. So they called it, I think it was like the deaf man's house or something. So it's like it's so, you know, just what a weird twist of fate that he moves into he can't hear and he moves into the house of a former deaf person, and there's all of this chaos going certainly in the big cities like Madrid and Barcelona, but in the countryside, you know, it's not unusual for like troops or revolutionaries to be going door to door and rounding people up who are pro or against or whatever. And it wouldn't have surprised me if he was on a hit list at one point, right? Anyway, so we've got this this color down. So now let's go dark. Let's really start putting the black on this painting. This is mostly dry. Good. Okay. In fact, you know, I've been promising I would take a look at the chat here. Wow. Whoa, there's a lot of comments. See, Joshua said, hey everyone, I'm excited to create a scary but iconic painting. Just finished transferring on canvas and thinking about doing a larger one. Not too sure yet. There's May, says hi everybody. Donna says hi May. Dolores is here. Hi Dolores. Joshua says, I think Napoleon got his brother to rule Spain, but the people's revolt because they did not want to be controlled by a foreign government, so Spain was the only country in the Napoleonic War. Well, Napoleon did famously he invaded Russia and was repulsed. And then obviously there was the famous Battle of Waterloo between Napoleon's naval forces and the British, and Napoleon's famous defeat at Waterloo. So Napoleon went all over the place. He had this like little man god complex, right? He wanted to take over the world. I watched a Napoleonic War documentary, so I'm sort of educated on the topic, and he did plunder a lot of goods from foreign countries, including artworks like Laguna and His Sons from the Holy Lamb by Jan van Eyck. May says, hi Don and Dolores and Josh, nice to have you. So a lot of people saying hello. Donna's on her way to Vancouver tomorrow. You better bring some shorts. It's very hot out here. Oh my goodness, we just got an air conditioner, but it's for our daughter, right? She gets everything. She gets a nice cool room now, because she did not sleep last night because it was so hot in our house. Lori says, one of my favorite things about this class is learning about all the artists and art history. Thanks for always including the history. My pleasure. Thanks, Lori. One of my favorite things is is history in general, and then more specifically art history. And I find it like the more we know about the history behind the paintings, it makes them come alive. And I think as you're painting it, it makes it so much more interesting to paint it. That's for me the way that I've been able to connect with the artwork that I'm so into. Is the more I learn about it, the more I want to learn even more, and it makes it so much more interesting when you go to a museum and you look at it. And you know, even just thinking about these like I remember when I went to Madrid and went to again, I think it's at the Prado where these paintings are. You know, I remember seeing them, and this image, you know, I'm sure I saw it in an art history class, and you know, and one of the ones I didn't sleep through, and it was like, oh, these are cool. I remember seeing these on the big screen in the auditorium, and it sort of was like, whatever. And then spent 10 minutes. There's lots of other people who were looking at them, so I'm like, oh, these are really important. The people really love these paintings. I don't, cool, but you know, they're pretty dark, and you know, there's lots of other things to see, and oh, I can't wait to go out later tonight and go out for some drinks and have fun and all that kind of stuff. And then it's later on, you're like, whoa, like you learn more and more, and you see them in books, and you get so much more excited. You're like, oh, now I got to go back there and look at them again. And then sometimes you go and you go look at the Goya paintings, and then you know, then there's other things that you realize, like, what? That was at the Prado, and I didn't even look at it, or I remember passing by it on the way to the gift shop, and now I got to go back there again. And right, that's what's super exciting about art, is that you kind of go through these different periods of life where you get more and more excited about certain artworks, and some other ones you're like for instance, the Mona Lisa. I've been blessed to have been able to go to Paris a number of times and seen the Mona Lisa. Every time I go to the Louvre, I make a point of seeing it, but at this, like, I'm mostly interested in just the whole absurdity that surrounds the Mona Lisa. Like, you can't really see the painting at all anyway, and you can only see it for maybe 10 seconds before they usher you away. So you don't really go to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa. It's more interested to see the gaggle of people pushing and shoving to get to see it. But it's like every time I go there, there's other things that I'm just like, oh, you know what? I've got a new list of things that I've got to see, because I've learned more. I've read other things that have made that artwork, those other artworks, must see. Let me see. Yeah, you guys are super active. I see May and Josh, you're having a whole conversation here. Everyone's congratulating each other on the great artwork they've been making. That's why I love the community that we've got there on Facebook, and then obviously in the class here and in the chat. There's all these people who are painting along, and who, I think what's kind of fun is when you're all painting the same painting, you kind of have an idea of how easy or difficult it is, and where common areas of difficulty and struggle are, and you have that kind of there's that little kind of secret bond that we have with one another, right? I see Anna Sider is watching. What emoji that is? What is that? It looks like two hands. Is that two hands tapping fist bumps or something? I don't know what that emoji is. Vulcan, yes. Vulcan, Alberta. I've been there once. Wow, you guys are busy. Oh, and May was, yes, May was. May, I think you're probably the longest tenured student in my classes that I've had continuously. May and I have known each other now for almost, well, about a year and a half, or maybe longer. Yeah, because we met in a photography class I was teaching at the community center. Oh, you know what I was going to mention, and I know this is going to be just a tiny little detour, but I would be remiss if I didn't do a quick little I just want to show you how you can find this. Just for anyone who's interested, I'm teaching another photography and a painting class in person here in Vancouver, starting in a few weeks. So if you wanted to find that, what I would just, let's see if you type in Mount Pleasant Community Center and click on this programs. I'm trying to see if this is the fastest way to how to register online. Let's see. So I'm teaching, drawing and photography. So if we type that in, okay, this is the page we want to get to. And then you can go to locations around the city. Here's the Mount Pleasant Community Center, and then here's the classes that I'm teaching. So one is, they're 5 2-hour-long classes. This one's Friday 7 to 9, and this one's Wednesday 7 to 9. And the animals, architecture, still lifes, that's where we're drawing animals, architecture, and still life. And so we're learning like basic how to draw using simple shapes, essentially. So learning how to draw all sorts of different animals, just starting with circles and squares and rectangles, and then we learn a little bit about perspective, and then how to draw from life. So drawing apples and oranges and cups and stuff. And then the other class, which you can take both of them if you want, or you take one or the other. Originally this was the part 1 and this was part 2, but they're kind of interchangeable at this point. But the other one here is people and landscapes, where I'm teaching people how to draw faces and then full figures, and then to draw landscapes. And if it's nice, we can go outside and we draw at the Dude Chillin' Park, which is right down the street from it. So if you're interested in that, that's my drawing classes. I'm teaching at Emily Carr, the university I teach at, in the fall, so I'm not there in the summer. I usually take the summer off. And then this is my photography class, this digital beginners class. So this is people wanting to learn how to use their cameras. Like if you've got a camera that you can take lenses on and off, or even some cameras where you can turn, the lens is built in. I teach people how to take pictures. Anyway, I just thought I would let people know about those classes. If there's not enough people in the class, it gets canceled, which is also just fine with me, because but I think I used to teach a lot there before the whole pandemic hit, and they're just sort of doing a little test to see what people's comfort level is for in-person classes again. Okay, so let's mix a dark color. And I think I'm going to use a cooler color, and we're going to put that in the background to start. We're going to also put it a little bit on the foreground as well, but since I've got some of these cooler colors, which I haven't really used my cool yellow, my cool red, I haven't used any of them at all, and my cool blue. Let's just let's use some paint so it doesn't go to waste. Now you could just use warm colors for the background, or for that dark color. It won't make too much of a difference. Like when we're talking really, really dark colors, warm versus cool, it's really hard to tell the difference. Having said that, one could argue that you might not be consciously aware of how to tell the difference, but your eyes are, and they are making judgments, and they are creating a space between those two things. So anyway, let's and of course it is the background, so using a cool color probably also makes some sense. So let's start with our cool yellow, and let's just take all of this cool red. Use a lot of it. Mix this together. And we're going to get an orange, just like the warm red. When we mix the warm red and the warm yellow together, we got an orange. This is a little bit more reddish because I put a lot of red in there. It's going to be fairly close to the color we had here. It's just not going to be quite as intense because they are a little bit closer, further away from one another, so they're crossing, getting closer to the neutral core. Okay, so that's good. Let's now take a scoop of this cool blue. Right, and now we're getting a kind of a brown. Now it looks a little bit of a greenish color right now because we've got that blue and the yellow, but it's now this kind of, it's like a really muddy, dirty, greenish brown. This is close to a color, viridian green, which is like a kind of an ancient classical color. Remember, most colors up until like 1950 were all just natural pigments. Somebody had to go out into a mine somewhere and dig ultramarine blue out and then grind it into a pigment. People would have to go and collect a whole bunch of beetles and crush them up to make a cool red. It was literally made with bugs' blood, right? So all these things were all natural pigments. And some countries, some paintings from different places in the world would have different natural, like the palettes would be different because they were sourced from different places that were available to artists at that time. Ultramarine blue, the only place it was, really one of the only places, or the main source of it was Afghanistan, right? So even just the thing about, I've probably mentioned this before, but after 9/11, when the war in Afghanistan, after when that began, the price of ultramarine blue, like authentic ultramarine blue, went through the roof. Like, who was mining ultramarine blue in the middle of a major war, right? So anyway, I just find that all that stuff so fascinating. Do I have that book out here? I may have mentioned it before. There's a really great book called Color by Victoria Findlay. I'm just gonna start painting. I'm going to show you a link to that book. But okay, so here's this kind of gross color. Let's make it even darker. Let's take some warm blue and put that in here, and we're getting even darker and grosser. Right now, let's take some warm red. Oh my goodness, what are you doing, Michael? Just an ugly mix of colors. Probably put a little too much red, and now it's kind of red dominant, but I need a little bit more cool blue in here. I'm just trying to mix like a really dark color. I could go right to the black, but I think what I want to do is save the black for just a few little spots in the painting. And this also, again, this is how Goya, he probably would have had gone to, like, you would go to a pharmacy and you would get your pigments, just like you would get in a pharmacy at that time. You could buy art supplies, and you could buy, painkillers, and a pharmacy was a lot like, if you've been to, I've been to Morocco and the souks there, which are like the markets in Morocco, and they have these like vendors who've got spices piled up into these like pyramid cone kind of shapes. So cool. Just like the most visually appealing sight you've ever seen. But that would have been like what a where artists would have got their art supplies, 200 years ago. So I got this this color. It's kind of dark and muddy, but it's a very moody color. So now let's put this on here. And again, I'm going to put a bit of glazing fluid because I want to make it a little bit transparent. As dark as it is, my goal is not to just lay a big flat dark color in this painting. I want some of this stuff that I already put down to kind of shine through a little bit. So let's just mix a bit of this transparent glaze and fluid in here. You could also use like just a matte medium. You could use gloss medium, but I always prefer matte medium personally. Okay, so let's just start applying this here. Again, you can see I'm kind of applying it in a bit of a haphazard way. You can see it kind of reacts to the colors that are already there. So let's take a look at this here. So my goal with this layer of paint is not to just, blast in a bunch of darkness in here. I want to cultivate these layers of paint that I've built up so that we have a really interesting background. Okay. So now let's move to a smaller brush, and we're going to continue this onto the figure. So where should we? Let's start. Oops, go the other way. How about let's go down to the legs here. You see all of this moodiness under here? That's what I want. Remember, as I said, we could paint black in here and be done with it. And, if that's what you want to do, by all means, go right ahead. I won't be offended. But, this is like a master study. I really want you to have some understanding of, like, how he would have gone about making this painting. And I think painting like this, if you can understand it a little bit, it'll really transform the way that you approach your own paintings. So I'm gonna darken all of this again later, but I'm putting a first layer of darkness, and then I'm gonna go that way. I'll be able to see where some of these lighter areas are because I can now, the next step I could actually be looser and just paint dark all over that area, and it'll darken but leave some highlights under here. So let's move over to this leg. So this is just like if I go back into that paint to just get more paint and less fluid on there, less glazing fluid, or medium, it just goes much darker, obviously. And I can kind of like just dry brush some of this, right? You get some of that paint on there, and then you can kind of blend it out a bit. Okay, let's keep on motoring around here. Let's go to the other side here. It is pretty, so he's probably just painting all of this directly from his imagination, right? Like he's kind of making it up on the spot, which is, pretty remarkable. So I'm still using this dark, ugly color that we mixed here. Remember, that was cool yellow, cool red, cool blue. There's a little bit of warm blue and a little bit of warm red in there. Right? So it's like all of the colors, really, right? Bunch of... It's also interesting to think of, like, sometimes, he might have, if this was just for himself in his own private room on the walls of his studio, he might have like made a decision to use leftover paint, for instance. He might have just scraped paint off of that he had on other paintings or palettes that he had used that, you know, sort of like, you know, restaurants, you know, and they've got, you know, they got a bunch of fish and it's going to go bad in a few days, so the fish goes on the menu as a special, and they tell all the waiters and waitresses to push the fish because we need to get rid of all of the fish that we got in stock. You know, I think about that same sort of thing with an artist, right? It's like, okay, man, I got a bunch of you know, cold blue here. We got to use up this cold blue. What am I gonna? I guess let's make a whole bunch of darker paintings, and I'll mix that in. You know, the company that I buy my the oil paints from is called Gamblin, and I've gone and visited their factory or office down in Portland. Really great, great company. I love Gamblin. If you're going to paint, I highly recommend them. I'm not paid by them or anything. I've just found, like, in terms of, actually, almost every paint company generally has really good customer service. You can call up any paint company, and most of them have like a technical advisor you can talk to if you have any questions. I've called up Scott at Gamblin many times, especially before I went up to the North Pole. I bombarded him with questions for transportation and all that kind of stuff, and he was really helpful. But that's not unusual either. A lot of the other companies, you know, are relatively small companies. There's, you know, and you can, if you have questions, don't be afraid to reach out and ask them. Okay, so let's start moving into the face here. I'm going to glaze in here. I think I need to actually have a little bit more glaze on my brush, I think. Let's see, I can probably I'll do a bit of dry brushing. So when I do that, I just sort of try to get as much paint off of my brush, and it's just like a dry brush, right? That way I'm not applying such heavy gobs of dark paint all over the place. So it's kind of just wild hair, right? You want to create the effect that this hair just sort of goes infinitely out here. It's just kind of this wild mane here, so I probably should have maybe put a little bit more blue extending out into this area. I didn't just realizing that now, but that's okay. Like, isn't there, like, the look on this guy's face, it's like he's, it's not an angry, like he's almost like, I don't even know what I'm doing, I'm lost control of myself, I'm killing my own son, what am I doing, right, like, isn't that, it's just like, there's so much, the expression on his face is just like, I think that's, you know, kind of what's terrifying about it. It's not just like he's some evil person just I want this to really be looking right at us, so closer to the middle here. The way that these eyebrows are kind of raised back here, so it's a little bit heavy. That's pretty good for that pass. Let me see, there's a little bit more just down here. Shoulder. Okay, so let's zoom back out, so you can see where we're at. Oh, that's cute. Okay. So I think what I want to do now is I want to put some blood on, I'm going to put some red on there. We'll darken the face a little bit, add a little bit more of that brown, and then I'm going to take the same color I just used and I'm going to go over the figure again a second time. Joshua says Saturn is a Greek god. Thank you, Josh, for correcting me. May says, I'm just watching, not painting tonight. Joshua says, I think France had a lot of rulers that wanted power, since there was a lot of hungry power left and right, but Napoleon was still loved for his Napoleonic Code. The same codes being used in multiple European countries, and French people did not want to be under a lot of restrictions. You know, interestingly, Napoleon wasn't all bad. He did usher in some, like, pretty much the whole university system that we have throughout the world today, we can owe in large part to Napoleon. Napoleon was, you know, if you have ambitions to run the world, then you have to be pretty organized. And one of the big things that I don't think he did it himself. Obviously, he put people in charge to do these things. But one of the things I'm most fascinated with is he instituted the metric system. We owe the metric system to Napoleon. And because he wanted to standardize measurement across the empire, right? So if you're trading with one colony and another colony, and you're trading, I don't know, sugar and rice, and you want to, then you want to be able to make sure that, because different countries, if everyone's coming from these different places, and the imperial system, like feet and inches, we're kind of pretty people have, if you go to the origin, a foot was actually somebody's foot, right? And so different people from different cultures have different sized feet. And, it's not such a big deal if we're talking 2 feet of, I don't know, a foot-long sandwich or something, right? But when it comes to, you're buying tens of millions of dollars of sandwiches, right? A little bit of a difference like that, or even small, can be, tens of millions of dollars, or 50 shipfuls of whatever, right? So Napoleon instituted the metric system. There is a place in underneath Paris where it's like the most bomb-proof place on Earth, where they have inside, you can look it up, there's a tiny little thing that is I think it's the centimeter, and it is intended to, if there's any kind of question as to, so they can always go back and measure the centimeter back to that, just like there's the atomic clock that we're intended to set our clocks to. Anyways, Napoleon standardized all those measurements and spread that across the world, and everywhere except the United States and maybe a few other people have adopted it, right? That's a pretty intense legacy, right? Okay, so let's, before I went off on my 20th tangent today, I'm just going to take some warm red, I think. I was going to take it right out of the tube, but you know what? I'm going to give it just a little bit of that darker color. You saw I didn't take much, just a tiny smidgen of it, so that it actually looks a little bit more like blood when you so it doesn't look too cartoony. Let's zoom in here. Okay. You can see, it's almost like the brush he ran it over the surface, and you could see where it kind of jittered there. Can you see that? In what I've just painted, but his version of it? That's super interesting. So that kind of stuff suggests that he's painting quickly, that he's very confident about what he's doing. There's not a lot of hesitation here. And why would he? If he's just sort of painting for fun, he's not super concerned about making it look quote-unquote right. If he doesn't think anyone's going to see it, there's... That's super interesting. I didn't even before notice this red that was all over the hands until we get up close. Actually, as I look at that, he's got little bits of red on the face, around the nose. Interesting. Even a bit around the eye. I don't know if you meant that to be blood, but it's just a little bit of a peachy quality here, so I'm going to take some of this, a little bit of what was it, white. Just going to take a bit of that, put a bit of this underneath here. I'm going to paint other things over top of it shortly, but you know, now it just makes me curious to look around. Is there any more red hidden around anywhere? Doesn't look like it. It's always a good idea just to do a little check. Okay, so let's come back up here and let's now mix an orange again. Actually, you know what, well, it looks like there's a bit of white in there, which I don't really want, so let's just take a bit of this darker color. Oops, sorry, it's all out of focus. And then let's come in here. I'm probably going to paint actual black in a few places on the face, so don't worry about painting over your black lines and all. Those again are just guidelines really for us. Just going to go over the painting in places where I feel like it needs more of a bit of an orange pop. Right, just taking my finger and kind of smudging some of this in. Even sometimes back into the shadows a little bit, right? A little heavy-handed with the blue on there, but that's okay. So then we're almost done, really. Like basically after this, we're gonna go another dark layer of paint. and then do a little bit of black, but we are doing really great for time. So I know it's like, oh, I've been painting for 2 hours already, we're good for time. Okay. What is that? A big blob of paint. Interesting. Maybe, who knows what that... It wanted to be there, so we'll let it stay there. So I'm just sort of like putting paint on, almost like dry, like a little bit of a dry brush technique, and just wiping or pushing some of it into the weave of the canvas, which is still a little bit there, right? Excuse me, my goodness. Yeah, this arm, there's something going on here. I'm telling you, I don't know what it is, but I don't know. Something here. I think it's another person. Either another person that I think he's already eaten, like maybe that's missing its legs or something. Again, this part of the canvas, kind of where I'm painting right here, was probably about there was where it was chopped off. And you can kind of see how I photoshopped this in. It's a little bit fuzzy. Doesn't quite look like the rest. So, just using my imagination here and what I know about his technique to fill in the gaps. Let's come back to the face. And I need the last... So yeah, and I'm just sort of dirtying this blue up a little bit. If I'm just kind of dry brushing a little bit over top of it, it's going to take some of the brightness, the intensity of that blue away. Very dry brush. There we go. Okay, so what's really left to do here? I mean, I'm looking at this body. I think before I move on to our final steps, I'm gonna put a bit of white back on here. So remember we had, this is our glazing fluid, we had a white here that, so I'd take a little bit of white, some glazing fluid on there. I'm not going to paint total white on there, I just want to get some little pops back on. Right, so it's kind of glazing a little bit with this. So now I've got a little bit more white on my brush. So these are like shoulder muscles right in here, on the back. So I would say we're kind of maybe 20 minutes from being done at this point. So we're kind of, what we're doing right now is just putting in our kind of final highlights before we take this painting into the dock. See, there's something. Doesn't that the more you look at it, the more something is happening right here. Like that's. I mean, I used to teach anatomy, or I still teach anatomy, to figure drawing, and there's no way, there's no reason for this shape to be there between your thigh and your calf. So I don't know. Something's happening there. Francisco. It's interesting that this knee is so bright. In fact, we might even have to add a little bit of... I'm going to take a bit of my warm yellow, a bit of white. It's really bright. It's almost like such an odd shape. It makes it look like a shield or something on there. This is his Saturn's bicep here. It's probably likely that, you know, after I go totally black, or not total black, but when we go really dark here in just about 30 seconds, that I might go back and add a little bit of highlights and stuff. You know, because you never really know what things look like until they're there, right? So. asked, do you think this painting was more clear and vibrant when first painted? Great question. That's a question I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to. Because, again, these were painted on the wall, and then they were taken off the wall and then put onto canvas. And that's a pretty complicated method, because usually what happens is, let's say this is the wall. Let's just imagine this is a wall, and you've painted your painting onto the wall. What they usually would do is take another canvas, right, and stick it, like they would put some glue onto this surface, and then put a canvas or some kind of wood or whatever onto the front, right, and then they would, you know, chisel this, cut this thing off of the wall. So then you have this canvas or piece of wood with a big chunk of plaster, and then you'd flip it over, so you'd have this canvas kind of, so you have something like this. Now the image is hidden, and then you're scraping this surface off, so you chisel all the plaster and wood or whatever was on the other side behind the painting, right? And then so you'd have this thin film, and then what you do is cover it again with some kind of a glue, a different type of glue than you put on the front of it, and then you'd put canvas onto the back, right? And you let that dry, and then you'd flip it back the other way, and then now you've got this stuff you got to get rid of, right? So then you'd use some sort of solvent, or I don't know how they got it off, and then you'd peel that away, and in theory now you've got this painting that is now stuck to a canvas. Now, if you do that well, then you're great, you've got the original one there. But remember, we put some kind of substance all over this side, and we got stuff off back. This is 200 years ago, and our understanding of how chemistry works, this is all chemistry, right, has changed quite dramatically over the past 200 years, right? Remember, you know, I mean, I don't, chemistry, yeah, there's just, people believed a lot of different things back then that they don't believe today, right? So, you know, it's, I don't know what they saw when they got that top layer off. There might have been just a hazy ghost-like film left on there, and then they basically just did what I'm doing, just repainted the whole thing, which is what some people think happened to the Salvator Mundi, that Leonardo painting that was bought for $500 million 3 years ago, the most expensive painting in the world, which we're going to make a painting of soon, so stay tuned for that. The original, I think, go back to your question, Laurie, was the original painting really dark? Or what was it? Was it more vibrant or more clear? I don't know. He often painted... It's pretty funny. There's he made drawings of himself doing this, so we know he did it. He wore like a big hat, kind of like what you imagine the Three Musketeers wearing, kind of like a sombrero, kind of, I guess, with candles on it. So he would often paint in the middle of the night in his studio, because remember, he would lock the doors. He didn't want people from the local village popping their heads in and watching what he was doing, so he'd often have all of the shutters and everything closed. He'd paint with this hat with candles on it, and they're dripping wax all over the floor and on his easel, and probably on his paintbrushes occasionally. So he's painting in this like very dark room, and he's painting these dark paintings, right? It's just, when you think of it like that, it's like, so you could imagine being in a studio that was probably about the size of how big of like a large bedroom, maybe, or not even, just like a bedroom, and with all the lights off and just candles on his hat, and he's painting. Like, things would have been very alive to him, I imagine. Like, I don't know if there were any clearer or darker to him. It's really hard to say. Great question. I mean, the more you think about this, the more questions come up, right? Okay, so I'm going back to the well here, going back to this dark color we mixed, and I'm also putting some glazing fluid in here just to thin it out a little bit, because I'm going to paint over a lot of stuff, but I don't know how dark I want to go just yet, right? I want to do this in a few different layers, potentially. And I love seeing all of the work that we've been doing, all these other layers underneath. I want to keep some of this stuff. You know, and again, it's, if you think about, like, there's people who quote-unquote restored this painting. Remember all of the, we did a painting of the Celia Jimenez, who famously tried to restore that Ecce Homo painting, the Jesus in that little village in Italy, and she didn't do the best job. And you know, people, we did that painting for our April Fool's Day painting. And so who knows, were the people that transferred Goya's painting onto canvas, were they, you know, the best, you know, were they using the best materials and the best things available to them at the time? I don't know the story. I don't know the story of that. Or were they, you know, just some people who bought his house after he died, and they were just trying to make a quick buck, and they just were like, oh, look at these. Okay, the Goya is kind of pretty well known, so let's, come on, Bob, come on over, bring your whatever tools you got, and let's take these paintings off the walls and we'll sell them, just like what the people do to the Banksy paintings, right? Banksy paints on the wall of a building, and immediately somebody, you know, within hours these days, hears about it, and they're there chiseling it off the wall and then trying to flip it for millions of dollars, right? Like, so what was the situation with these black paintings of Goya's? And will we ever know? Probably not, unless some kind of, you know, letters or something shows up in an attic somewhere, which does happen. You know, it is kind of amazing how there's sometimes these mysteries that do get solved, like hundreds of years later, when like a great example of it, and you can watch, there's a documentary that you can see it on YouTube about Van Gogh's ear, and this investigative reporter started looking into that whole story and found in an archive that no one had looked at for the past 100 years an original sketch made by the doctor who examined Vincent van Gogh and basically settled this mystery that people had been talking about for the past 100 years as to exactly what happened there. But it was just sitting in a box in an archive, and no one had seen it. So people were arguing about this thing, and then boom, all of a sudden this evidence comes out of nowhere. Okay, so basically so far I've just been going around the edges, just darkening the dark stuff around the figure. And then I'm gonna slowly, I'm gonna darken this again, obviously, but I'm doing it slowly as in glazes, so that way I've got lots of depth in this darkness, right? Like the next time I do this, it's going to get much darker, and on camera you're not going to see a lot of this detail, but it's going to be there for people when they look at it in person. And you could do the same thing on whatever painting you're making, and it's just gonna, I'm telling you, if we just did this as black, because we could, like, again, I could have done, it would be kind of fun to try to do this painting as quickly as possible, and I bet you I could do a version of it in probably 30 minutes. I bet you I could knock it out fast, but it certainly would not have the nuance that I've been slowly building up here. I know it's probably, for some people, this is just like ridiculous. It takes way too much time, but I'm obviously having a good time. So I'm going to blow dry this, and then we're going to do another layer of glaze on top. Oops. Just have to be a little careful here. I've got this ice pack sitting on my camera above. You can see water dripping off of it there, which I don't want to get into my camera. Let's see. Hopefully I can get this painting finished before it gets too much more heat in the studio here. Let's just take a quick second. Okay. Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, so let's, I'm going to do this again. There's another glaze. Actually, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this as a glaze. And this time I'm going to start going over top of the body. So we're going to darken significantly parts of the body as we go here. So that we're going to start integrating the body back into the shadows, and then we're going to do the background again. So let's zoom in. Quit that far. And then okay. So as I'm doing this kind of thing, and kind of like just a little bit of a tip when it comes to figures, is you kind of want to try to avoid any like really abrupt straight lines on things. So if in doubt, give it a little wobble. Give your line a wobble. Sounds like a Raffi song. We listen to a lot of Raffi in the house here because we've got a young kid running around. Give your line a little wobble, little wobble. You can see how we're starting to kind of get that level of darkness. It's starting to get there. So much so that in times here, I'm actually just starting to go, I'm using less glazing fluid at times. I'm just going, like my glazing fluid is in this area here, and then the kind of the original mixture, that dark color, is up in here. So I just sort of dive into there at times, and I want to get darker. See, now I can just paint, I can kind of glaze over like all of these darker areas, and because there's some of that light below there, it just sort of it still kind of shines through a little bit. Some of this, it's a little bit thick now. I gotta wait for that to dry, so we'll just keep on going around the figure. By the time that's done, everything will be dry enough. Okay. Start coming back up to this body here. Let's see the leg down here. This is all kind of hypothetical stuff that I've laid in myself. So really the question in my mind at this point, as we're getting close to finishing up, is even, do I want to add black to this? Which is like, I mean, because I could just do a few more layers of this dark color and I'll be as close to black as you probably can get. Oh, yes. Okay. That's a little bright, so let's just take that down, glaze over that. Glaze over this bicep mostly. Glazing fluid onto my palette because I was all out. Alright, just glaze over parts of this face. Let's move this back there. There we go. So let's zoom out again, just so you can see where I'm at in terms of progress. I said it'd be done in 20 minutes. Again, it's just a matter of like how dark do you want to make this. Now I'm going to go to, we're going to do it, let's hope this is going to be our final layer. I'm just going to add a little less blending, or slow drying, not slow dry, less glazing fluid, sorry, on here. And make this kind of final layer much more opaque. So I should hit this with the blow dryer because I'm getting a bit of tacky, sticky paint here. Okay. Feeling pretty darn good about this one. Okay, so one thing I notice is, just looking at them side by side, is there's a lot more blue in his painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glaze over a lot of this with the cool blue, with just with some glazing fluid. So is there any paint left in here? Ah! Overhead camera just overheated. Let's see. Okay, cool. Let's see. Hopefully I don't get too many drips coming down from above. Just need one little, do I want to open, oh, there we go, tube of paint. Okay, so I'm just going to take glazing fluid and that blue, kind of just rushing a bit here. That does it's super subtle, that effect, but I think this is what this painting needed. Keep that little, whatever's going on here, kind of mysterious. Going to take this color and just kind of brush it a bit in the background. I'm sure you can't see any, it's probably pretty hard to see any of that in here in the background, but okay, so I'm going to do just a little bit more in the background, just a few places I think just need to be just a little bit darker. Again, I'm still doing this as a bit of a glaze. I have a bit of a glaze in my paint. So what's cool for me, like, again, it's getting to the point where it's so dark on camera that it's hard to see the nuance in here, but that's okay. want people to wonder what is going on in all of these shadowy areas. Yeah. Okay, I think in terms, I don't think I'm going to use any black actually. I think I'm going to keep this just to the colors that we mixed. But let's finish it out by going right back in. Oops. Or you know what? Maybe I'm going to use a dash. It'll just help finish off because I probably can hear upstairs are sitting down for dinner, so I could just do little glazes all night long. But okay, so what I'm going to do, I've got this dark color. Here's a little bit of black. You can tell it's very close to the, it probably doesn't show up on camera, but it's very close to this very, very dark color I've got. So I'm not going to use all of it. I'm just going to steal a little bit of that black, mix it into my color to make it just a step darker. So this will be the darkest color on my palette. I'm a little bit hesitant to just go full on black because it might really stand out dramatically from everything else on here. So everything's wet. I kind of want to, so I'm going to blow dry this real quick. Dripping from the heaven above here. So let's finish this off kind of quickly here. So you'll see that this black will really, like, let's say particularly the eyes, right? It's going to make those eyes like wild. Oh, sorry, let's show you this. It's funny now that I'm looking much more carefully at the way he did his face as opposed to mine. I see lots of differences, but See, the first thing I thought that just came to mind, does this remind you a little bit of Animal from the Muppets? I don't know if that reference is too old. I don't know if they've... But it reminds me of that wild character in the Muppets. Oh, I saw in the chat as I was using the hairdryer there that Lori said, I have a painting that I did when I felt devastated and so sad, but I haven't showed anyone because I thought it was too disturbing. I think it is the only painting that I've shown any emotion in. And maybe my best. I was just gonna say it's probably your best. I firmly believe that the best art out there is the art that that makes us feel the most uncomfortable. That and not, it doesn't mean that it has to be like shocking or negative or, you know, have about negative things, but it could be a painting of flowers, but you feel embarrassed by it for some reason. I think like that, you know, that often is because there's something about it that is so new and unfamiliar to us that we're having a hard time reconciling it with ourselves, that we feel like we're having a hard time integrating it back into our life. Like there's something about it that feels wrong, or that we shouldn't have done it. Using a style that maybe is out of vogue or something like that. And anyway, I think the best art out there is the art that we're too afraid to show people. I see some people in the groups have posted to the Facebook group. Which, you know, it's, I think, a good idea. You know, it's a pretty supportive group of people who are trying to climb the same mountain. the story I tell about graduate school often is that one of the things that was helpful about going to get my master's degree in painting is that I think it saved me a decade of fumbling around, because I got so much varied feedback on so many different things that at the end of the day it was like, I just have to do the thing that I want to do the most, no matter how people feel about it, because I'm the only person that ultimately needs to be satisfied. And if other people like it, that's like a cherry on the top. But, you know, I can understand why some people feel afraid to show certain artwork, and sometimes we make paintings about things that are traumatic moments in our lives, and we feel kind of embarrassed to show them because we don't want people to know those stories about us, or because we feel like we're revealing too much. But, you know, ultimately, I think like art, the purpose of art is for healing, and that's the reason why we go see movies, and why people tend to like movies that have like a happy endings, that you know, we put characters in these situations that seem almost insurmountable, and they suffer all sorts of horrible this pain and humiliation, and at the end, not all the time, but often, people come out of it better and more well-rounded, etc. And so by kind of sharing the stories and artwork and images of things that we feel embarrassed about, it often it's liberating for other people, because they feel like, oh yeah, that's like exactly how I feel, or that happened to me. And so okay, just now going to tour around the artwork, see if there's anything else really dark that needs any special attention. Okay, I think I'm pretty close to being done. What I want to do, just to finish off, and it's going to be really hard to see on camera, I think, if I back that back out. Oh, yeah. Come on. Okay, let's back this up. See, he's darkened that face. So what I'm just going to do, I just got that dark color. I'm going to get some glazing fluid on here to make it a little bit more transparent, because some of these lines, it's hard to see, but are definitely kind of floating right on the surface. So I just want to make them feel a little bit more welcome here. So this little bit of a darker paint that's got gray in it. How did that happen? Maybe that, hopefully that's just glazing fluid. Ah, that is white, I think. I think maybe it's glazing fluid. I don't know, we'll see when it dries. Might just be glazing fluid that hasn't been mixed in properly. Zoom in on the face, and I think we're just about done here. So it's helpful to kind of back out a number of times. If you're got your nose right into your painting, sometimes it's really hard to see what the overall thing looks like. So just take a step back. I just want to take a bit of this warm yellow. Might have been a bit too intense. back to some of this black. It's a little darker underneath that nose, isn't it? Right now it's the bottom of his nose, just a little too bright. Okay, I think I'm just gonna. I could just paint on this forever because I just love this painting. But so let's just call it there. I think. Do I want to do anything else here? It's a bit darker down there, isn't it? This is why I love glazing, is you can just like do a little glaze there, just darken a little bit here and there. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could just keep on tinkering to get that face just a little bit closer, but I think for our purpose it is, we have reached the promised land. So, let's that's my name. It's the 22nd. I'm so happy. Like, what I love about doing this kind of thing, I originally began this whole thing as just as to teach people how to paint, and then I started really getting into it because it's like, oh, you know what? I could just start painting all my favorite paintings. And because like this is the kind of thing I would love to have, like a poster of this painting, but you know, it would cost like kind of probably $60-70 to get something kind of probably almost custom made. And then here now I've got one that I've actually painted myself, so it's going to be way more meaningful to me than anything I could just buy from the store. And not only that, not only now do I have the image, but I've had the experience of painting the image, walking a little bit in Goya's shoes, and have a great deal of understanding and appreciation for his style and his technique here. Yeah, I don't even want to look at this painting anymore, because as I do all the time, I start seeing things that could be adjusted, and at some point you just have to say, you know what, I think I've learned the lesson that I needed to learn from this painting, and I'm ready to move on. Okay, I'm super excited about, well, look at all the comments in the chat. May says, your painting looks fantastic. You've really captured the essence. Amy says, this painting is scary. May says, the painting didn't make sense to me until you painted it. Now it makes sense to me. Perfect. That's good. Okay, everybody. So I am going to call it a day. I really appreciate everyone for joining me, for painting along with me. I would love to see your version of today's painting, or any other painting you're working on, including Lori, if you want to be brave and share that painting that you're not quite sure of. That would be great to share it on the Facebook group, and we can all give you some great kudos and encouragement, and maybe it's the beginning of a whole new series of artworks. You never know. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel, and if you want to make a donation, there's a link down below to the PayPal. If you want to send a check or money order, all those options are available, so you just contact me through the website or Facebook page. My website is down there too, you can find that. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say about Goya. There's a lot I could say. There's lots of movies about Goya, maybe just to kind of mention. You know what? Let's just call it a day. You can easily Google Goya. There's Goya's Ghost, Goya in Bordeaux, Goya, the Naked Maja, another Goya, Las Meninas. Although that's, I think, about Velázquez. But anyway. Also, just to show you how important Goya is in Spanish culture, the Spanish version of the Academy Awards is the Goya Award, right? So the highest prize you can get for film in Spain is to win a Goya, which I think is really interesting. He never made made any films. He died 100 years before films were even invented. But I think people saw the drama and the excitement and the mystery, all the emotions he was able to evoke in his paintings, and thought like, wow, it would be amazing if we could do that with cinema. All right. Okay, everyone, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you guys on Thursday for our next painting. And I got a whole bunch of really cool artworks lined up in the future, so we'll see you then. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you again very soon. Good night, everybody.